Should be able to record.
Yep.
Okay, there we are. And this is episode 2.
Yep, episode 2. And what do we end up calling this podcast, Robert?
I was just having a bit of a mental blank, actually.
Actually, okay. All right. Actually, it's called the goalpost. And the reason yeah. And now the reason I've called it that is because one phrase I hear being kicked around in the light of woke things is that the feminists and the progressives and the woke people are moving the goalpost each time they jump from one grievance to another, and that word goalpost has stuck with me. So I think it'll be a good idea to just have like a goalpost that doesn't have to be moved. Our terms, so to speak, our goals, our objectives, they're pretty straightforward. They're clear cut. I think we can define them clearly, I think.
Absolutely. And in fact, I really do love that name for precisely that reason, because feminists do tend to have a really bad habit of moving the goalposts, as you suggest. So yes, either we'll defeat them on one argument, or they'll simply redefine the terms. And I've got a good example of that, actually.
Okay, let's go.
Tonight, yeah. So I know we're planning to talk about misandry, but there's one particular issue which has come up, and this is something I've actually written a couple of articles on in the past. I'm writing one at the moment. Of course, it's the so-called wage gap. Now we'll use the term earnings gap. There is absolutely a difference between male and female earnings. Now it's not always advantageous to men. It's been the case. So in most cases, men earn more than women. But there are counterexamples. So if I remember correctly, there's a few different sort of categories it falls into. Single women in their 20s and 30s living in large cities, childless and who are childless, tend to out-earn men in a similar situation. Otherwise, it tends to be men that out-earn women. And of course, the feminists argue that this is discrimination. Well, we know it isn't. There's plenty of data on this. The CONSAD report in the US is a major report. We have reports like that here in Australia as well. But it's interesting. One of the ones that's just come out. It's the fourth time they've done this. So the 4th edition of this particular report, and they talk a lot about. They imply a lot of discrimination and so forth, but they actually admit, if you look in the report and you look at the footnotes, that they can't quantify a fairly substantial proportion of the earnings gap. So we tend to use that term earnings gap rather than wage gap or pay gap.
Yeah, true.
Right. They can't quantify. It's currently about 36%, I believe, that they can't quantify, and they simply define it as discrimination. So there's 36%, we can't work out what that is. Oh, well, we'll just call that discrimination. And then that gets picked up by the mainstream media and reported. Now, I picked up on this in 2019. At the time, it was actually 39%. This is the previous report. And I realized I wanted to know where they were getting this data. And it was unfortunately about a month after the original report that I really started to dig into it. And I wish I'd been a little bit quicker on it, actually. It might have got a little bit more traction in the media. But anyway, I dug into it, and if you dig down and you look at the footnotes, you see they actually do admit this. They actually admit it twice in the third report, the one from 2019, and the 4th one's just come out. And interestingly enough, this time the mainstream media has actually admitted it, and I find that really interesting that they have admitted that they simply define anything they can't quantify as discrimination. That's for Australia.
Okay. Now you mentioned single women in their 20s out-earn men. Can you elaborate more on that? Why is that happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a number of sort of characteristics they have. Is that they live in cities. I think from memory they tend to have university degrees. They are childless, and they tend to be in their 20s and 30s. And I suspect this may have something to do with, I think there's probably a few things going on, but I suspect it may have something to do with the fact that women are out earning men in degrees. And for the moment, that's probably offering those women an advantage. I think the long-term prognosis for university degrees is a lot poorer, except for STEM. But for the moment, I suspect that is one of the things that's boosting these women up. And of course, we also do see discrimination against men, and that's been documented. A lot of people, if you look at human resources departments, there's a lot of people who I think would agree with the statement that there's potentially discrimination going on in there. It certainly seems that way to me. I don't have hard data to claim that. Where we do have hard data, though, is in STEM hiring, actually, where it's been found that there's a preference for hiring women over men, so there's a number of studies that have shown that, and so we are seeing hiring preferencing that going on, and also the university degrees, I suspect, are contributing factors.
What's keeping men out of the universities? And because obviously the women are the ones kind of dominating that area of getting degrees, going to colleges, that sort of thing, that turnout in colleges. Now, is it mostly that we still think that women need all these benefits and they need to be that much more encouraged even after all that's been done?
Well, that's certainly what the mainstream media, at least here in Australia, is constantly going on about. It really constantly drones on about how bad women have it, and how we need to boost them up further and so forth. I mean, we had an election here recently. On an election night, on a panel on one of the TV stations, one of our female politicians commented that women are angry, which is very interesting for them to say that things are that bad, that Australian women are angry, even though they're out earning men with degrees and all the other things we're seeing.
Crazy thing is, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes whether men are invisible or there's that much disdain for men that it's worse than being ignored, I think. Because the issues, it should be obvious to people. It's obvious to us, but it seems like it's just hard to tell for me. Is it going one way or the other? Is it more of a conspiring kind of a thing, or is it just really ignorance?
Well, I tend not to believe in widespread conspiracies much. I think it's more grassroots than that, to be honest.
Sure.
Yeah. In fact, in some ways, I think feminism really spreads like a religion. Actually, I think it's got relatively simple concepts behind it in a lot of the cases. There's nothing really too intellectually demanding in it. And I think it just sort of spreads almost organically. I think that's my suspicion.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant by conspire. I don't necessarily mean conspiracy, vast hidden conspiracy theory, but something that the average person just kind of connives in, even unwittingly, I suppose.
And one of the Soviet leaders, might have been Beria, I think, or some, said something along the lines of, if you keep repeating a lie, it becomes the truth. And we do see that these are, again, coming back to the so-called wage gap or the earnings gap, call it, they just keep repeating this idea and this claim that there's this systemic discrimination against women. And even though all the data shows that isn't the case, the CONSAD report, which is an enormous report commissioned by the US Department of Labor, and various reports that have gone on here and elsewhere as well, show it's not the case. And they just keep repeating it over and over. And apparently a lot of people believe it.
How do we get them out of that?
Well, I think it has to be my view is just constant releasing of factual information. I'm really interested, as I said, about the mainstream media now admitting this, that it's simply a definition, that they've simply redefined the unquantifiable component. I'm wondering if our efforts over the last few years are starting to sort of bear fruit there. That I wrote that report about in 2019, and has it been picked up in ways that perhaps we're not even seeing in the media? And they've started out this time by admitting it, which I found really interesting. I didn't expect that. I really didn't.
Right. Well, there's a lot of things we didn't kind of expect this past year. Like I'm still at awe at the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard verdict. I didn't
Mm,
think that was possible.
mm,
I'm glad it happened. I'm
yeah,
glad that the results were as much as we got, but I'm still in some kind of disbelief about that.
a lot of
It's
people
yeah,
would.
yeah,
I think so. There was a lot of suspicion that the court. I mean, we know obviously there are biases in the courts, but I guess like we've talked about before, it's not absolute, and the right thing does happen sometimes, and the jury saw through it. In this case, they saw through the lies.
absolutely.
Mm.
All right, so in that case, what's the next step? Like, I see examples that actually try to prove our point here, like like case studies, like experiments in the public atmosphere. Like, if you abuse a man, then either people just kind of look, maybe laugh, maybe ignore it, and if the opposite happens, then suddenly they intervene so hard they say, no, no, this is a test, this is
Yeah,
an experiment, so don't need to get hostile.
that's right.
Yeah, so there are, I think they're kind of trying to sneak in sanity into the mainstream consciousness. I think they're still not fully uh, supportive of men's issues for being men's issues from my taste, but I think it's slowly starting to creep in, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. There's definitely been a feeling. I've been at this for about a decade, and I've definitely seen a change in the way that people relate to men's issues. In the last, even 5 years ago, it just wasn't the same. As the people would be very dismissive of men being victims of domestic and interpartner violence, for example, and other ways. And there's a lot of people now who will acknowledge that it does happen, even if they then try to claim they're a minority or whatever, but they're still at least acknowledging it. So yeah, there definitely is change. I think what we're doing is working, in all honesty. And I know a lot of people. There's a lot of people get despondent in our movement and
Mhm.
in related movements, so because it's a lot. It's hard, and as you know, there's a lot of pushback and so forth, and a lot of people are very hostile,
Right.
and people get down very despondent. But my sense is that we are making headway. We're changing things slowly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
I mean, I myself am pretty new to this movement, and I don't know if it's despondency that I've experienced yet, and hopefully I will never have to.
Mm.
But right now I'm just kind of, I'm not really expecting like grand success on my part anyway. Like, in terms of will I see some genuine results against gynocentrism in this lifetime, against misandry in this lifetime? But uh, I try to offer something new. I guess maybe some things that people kind of ignores. Maybe some things fall through the cracks. Maybe they don't want to admit certain things. Like, I see right now that the pushback is against feminist misandry, uh,
Mm.
but I try to tackle more casually taken for granted sort of misandries, even outside of feminism. So, and that's the thing. Like, I don't see that as particularly popular, but I don't care. I just speak my part, and so it's not really a failure. Really, I'm just doing what I always do, and uh, if I get a success, that's great. But I don't think I failed in anything there. If that makes any kind of sense.
No, I agree actually, and I think that really just even trying to just standing up and doing something about it, I think is a such a positive thing to do. I used to get really frustrated about some of these problems, and I
Mhm,
have friends in the wider community who are very frustrated with the problems we're seeing, the problems we talk about.
mhm,
And I said to them, I used to get frustrated too, but now I'm doing something about it. And even if it's slow, and even if it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, at least I know I'm doing something about it. So I don't feel it. I don't get frustrated the way that I used to. Actually, if anything,
mhm.
it's been more positive for me. Say, well, yeah, this is hard and it's painful, and there's even there's a personal price to pay and so forth in terms of lost friends and so forth. But you know what? I'm doing something I feel is right, and at least I know when I'm spending that time, that's something that's contributing to society.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So, one question I'm kind of coming up here is that like any given human being, sometimes men have their low points that they need to kind of get some help from
Mm.
for. And if a woman is at a low point, we kind of rush to help her, but we downright hate it when men have it. It's unsightly, basically, that they would have to ask for help, and that they're in a kind of a, they need to kind of, I don't know if I'm using the word correctly, but like a pick me up, I suppose. Um, it's like they're, they're not worth their time, and they're kind of lower than humans sometimes. That's the impression I get others perceiving these sort of men. I don't want to say downtrodden so much, but you kind of get what I mean.
Mm. Well, in fact, actual fact, I mean, if you look talking about dehumanizing men and so forth, I mean, look at even things that we talked about it before, drafting people to go to war. It's men who are drafted principally to go to war, and they essentially in some cases are put into the meat grinder. I mean, look at the current conflict in Ukraine.
Yes.
I've heard a figure that 200 soldiers a day are dying on each side. So that's principally essentially 400 men that are dying every day. This war continues, and it's been going for 130 days now. So absolutely, the numbers even from this conflict, and actually I looked at the Battle of Stalingrad recently, and now it's a major battle, and a lot of people know about this. I actually didn't realize the numbers were as high as they were. They were talking about something like 650,000 dead in some of the and the vast, now that does include civilians as well, but a very high proportion of those will be soldiers. I think the Germans have something like 400,000 dead. I mean, they're just extraordinary numbers, and these are principally young men who in many cases were drafted against their will. They didn't want to, they were forced to go fight, and their life is wasted. How's that for dehumanizing?
To be sure. In fact, it's kind of a scam, honestly. It's where they're promised glory, they're promised rank if they survive, they're promised a good life after the fact, of course, but they sell this idea of going into war by saying that they are the more competent ones. Like even now, I think I hear arguments about the draft or something like that. We don't do it for the women because the women suck at fighting or something like that. But I wonder if it's not just this notion that we can't afford to lose our women, but men, on the other hand, screw them, I guess. Just feed them to the furnace, so to speak.
Which, of course, is the classic gynocentric view. That's right. That the lives of the women have to be preserved. And as I've said, I think that even if that was true once for societies, it isn't true anymore. We've got nearly 8 billion people now. We don't need to reproduce numbers very, very quickly. And my view is if a society needs to defend, even if the society needs to draft its citizens in order to defend itself, then all able-bodied adults must bear that responsibility, male or female.
Well, especially with the technology that we have right now in terms of the military, I think. So, because the more upwards we go in technology, the more everybody can kind of participate, honestly, and more can kind of opt to not participate if they don't really want to. Right. So it's definitely a different kind of a mindset that we can afford to have here than it used to be.
I think you're saying that that they're taking the sort of muscle brawn isn't as important, perhaps, as you're saying, in terms of a lot of its mechanization now.
Yeah, not as much nowadays, because in terms of not just for fighting, of course, but for the intelligence. Technology is just there's so many ways that so many different people can participate if they have to.
That's right. Yep. And there's actually the majority of military roles are non-combat roles as well. So even, and I can understand, some aspects of society will continue to argue about putting women into combat or not. But nevertheless, there are plenty of military roles. That alone isn't justification not to draft women, because there are plenty of military roles that where women can go into. And I can't recall if we talked about this last time, but I mentioned in a video recently about Israel, and I compared it to Eritrea. And in Israel, of course, they do draft women, but they don't put women into combat against their will. Women can volunteer for combat, but they draft women, and there are many of the service and support roles in Israel Defense Forces are staffed by women. So That's something like the US with the selective service. I absolutely think they need to put women into selective service, either abolish selective service, or put all able-bodied men and women into it on an equal basis.
Yeah, I get it. You can't have it both ways. That's
No,
the idea, right? Now, of course, the way I would say we can kind of make this work is that, this in my mind, the idea of America is that, we rather voluntarily kind of step up to kind of defend self, others, and country. Basically, this kind of idea that, like, I don't remember if I got the quote correctly. I'll probably have to end up paraphrasing it, but, like, in every blade of grass, like a gun or something like that. You kind of heard that expression, sort of, right?
right.
Yeah, basically. So the idea is that, conscription per se might be redundant, I think. If we kind of keep our culture of self-defense kind of more heightened, I think.
And people would volunteer. I mean, like in World War II, where there were, of course, huge numbers across the West of people volunteering. So, I mean, some countries did introduce conscription in the end, but they didn't really. Western countries generally didn't need to in the early days of the war. There were more than enough people, more than enough men volunteering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but now over here we kind of have this kind of fear of guns, I suppose, in the United States, where the guns are the most defining feature, I think, of its in a historical context. Even in cartoons, they're starting to fear guns. Like they would send, they used to have guns like Yosemite Sam and Looney Tunes, right? But I heard that there's some recent attempts to kind of censor that, I think.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And another thing is that, in animated fiction in places like Japan, they had guns in the cartoons and stuff like that, right? But when the Americans pick it up for their translation, their own localized versions, the guns get censored, which because children shouldn't see guns on TV. That's the kind of mindset we got here, and that's it just dawned on me one day how crazy that is, because this is supposed to be the gun country, like
it's the US can be I've often heard it said it's a land of contrasts. So for those who don't know, I'm originally from Australia. I lived most of my life in Australia. However, I have lived in Canada for nearly a decade, and I was within 45 minutes of the US border, and I did go to the US many times. So I've mainly been to New York State and Florida, and a little bit in California and Oregon. I went to Connecticut once, but so I've missed flyover country, I'm afraid. But I flew over it, yeah. But anyway, so I've sort of had an outsider's view of the country, and it is interesting, actually. It is quite different to other Anglosphere countries, or a little bit different in some ways. It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. So I lived in Canada, been to the UK. Probably more of an emphasis on individual rights, I suppose. That's something that you do sort of see. I haven't been. Oh, actually, no, I've been a couple of times in recent years, but probably the last time I spent a lot of time there was about 10 years ago, and there was sort of quite a lot of nationalism, I think, in the US. But I kind of feel, I don't know what you feel, I wonder if that started to decline a little bit in recent years.
Nationalism, you mean?
Yeah, nationalism, exactly. There's sort of the woke agenda pushing back against that a little bit.
It's like, here's the way I'm seeing it. It's like the both ends, the opposite ends, are kind of becoming heightened. The fierce anti-Americanism, and then because in places like Florida, here we kind of love Trump and the American flag and everything like that. So it's like
polarization.
I suppose so. Yeah, it's like we don't know who's a reactionary of what anymore. Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Now I've come to really appreciate this nation and everything. So it's not that I don't like the American pride thing at all, actually. And I completely understand the woke problem as we have it. It's kind of going absolutely haywire right now. So I'm just at a point that, I'm glad that somebody is pushing back against the woke. Honestly, it's not something we need. I think.
No, I think it's ultimately very, very destructive. Exactly. That's right.
Mhm.
I mean, one of the things we're seeing, unfortunately, and this is not just in the US, we're seeing, I think, across well, probably not the UK, but otherwise we're seeing it in the English, is the idea of a colonizer country where they talk about decolonization and so forth. In fact, I've tried to ask them exactly what they mean by that. It's interesting, same with feminism and other aspects of woke culture. They tend to be quite evasive, which of course comes back to your point about them moving the goalposts.
Yep.
They tend to be quite vague. I mean, a good one is sort of closer to home for us is toxic masculinity. I mean, ask them what they mean. Go to a feminist website and look for a definition of toxic masculinity. If you can find a definition at all, it'll actually be quite waffly and quite vague and make sort of vague references to things that men do that are negative behaviors. And so, well, what sort of negative behaviors?
Right.
The only one that they've really sort of, you can nail them down on is stoicism.
Really. I mean, stoicism can be misunderstood. I think it's that, it's like I think some still, even on our side, kind of misinterpret it as like a complete obliteration of emotion. And no matter who's oppressing you, don't whine and something like that. But I don't think that's stoicism, actually. I think that's stoicism is more about self-governance of emotion, knowing when to expressing it, knowing when to kind of shove it and focus on the task at hand. I think, and this, I'm not what you would call a philosophical stoic. That's more my wife, actually. But I think I had that understanding correct. Do I?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I think there's a concept of Roman stoicism, which I think is a little bit different to what we talk about. So I want to just add that I think that stoicism, at least as represented in men in general, is a bit of a double-edged sword. It can be destructive in some situations. Men will keep pushing. Essentially, it encourages men to keep pushing forward, even when there's quite a lot of adversity, and that can be a good thing and can result in incredible inventions and so forth. But it can also be destructive in the sense that sometimes we know men don't go to the doctor as often as women, and that's part of stoicism. So they're being stoic about it. Not in the Roman sense, but they're being stoic about it. They're just saying, I will battle through. That can be negative, but it can also be positive. So I tend to view it as a bit of a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. And before I forget about it, I want to comment on the whole toxic masculinity bullshit word. The only thing that warrants that title is gynocentric masculinity to me. But the feminists aren't going to admit that that's the one that's toxic, because they want gynocentric masculinity, if they want it at all, masculinity at all. So I consider anything the feminists and the woke have to say about the alleged toxicity of masculinity, or the toxic kind of it, is 100% horseshit.
Yeah, but just getting back to the definitions and stuff, like, you won't find definition of toxic masculinity on their sites. Go look at our sites. You'll see clear definitions for things like gynocentrism and male disposability and all these things. We'll quite happily talk about exactly what it is, talk about exactly what our aims and objectives are. If you look on A Voice for Men, the objectives of the site are there. There's a real difference between the feminist approach and our approach in terms of that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing I want to kind of bring up now is, since we're still on the misandry subject, I think to try and explain it to someone who this is not so obvious to, because they might find themselves relatively popular among men. Among women, I suppose. Like maybe that's what their life situation is. Well, it's like men are seen as loved if they are useful, if they serve some kind of material or mechanical value, I suppose. And if they don't serve that expectation, especially towards women, then they're basically hated. So it's one or the other, honestly. And the part where they're loved is very few, very shallow, and very, how do I put it, conditional, I suppose. Yeah.
So that comes back to Warren Farrell's quote: men are human doings and women are human beings," which I thought was quite a very neat play on words. He said that many, many years ago.
Of course.
I do think it really covers it very, very well. Men do tend to be valued for their actions, and men themselves tend to value themselves and other men in terms of their actions. This is a problem. One problem I think we have seen, it has been talked about quite a lot, that when men retire, a lot of them have been very focused on their jobs, and when they retire, they seem to, they may be quite aimless or listless and so forth, and this can contribute to early death and so forth. So I encourage men to get hobbies and keep a little bit of focus. Obviously, you focus on work a bit, you want to focus on your family, but there's also, you've got to have your own time, your own hobbies and so forth.
Yeah. Well, with the amount of hobbies I have now, I hope it never runs out. I do. I have almost, I mean, I'm only like, I'm about to be 33 in just a matter of days, but, I feel like I do so many things, I just can't keep up with them. And I hope, and it sounds like a good problem to have. I think it's, like this is so much stuff that I'm basically never going to be bored, I think,
Yeah.
I just need to be able to have the energy to do it, but still.
Yeah, energy and time, exactly. In fact, that's very much like myself too. I've dabbled in a lot of different hobbies and so forth. It's only in recent years that I've been able, I've actually sort of reduced it a little bit in recent years and focused more on some of them. But for a long time, it was very much the case for myself as well. So, and we still haven't played Magic the Gathering. So one of these days we've got to get.
We have to do it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I got some of the decks over there. Actually, it's in that little Walmart contact lenses box. But yeah. I mean, it's something I would definitely like to get going and see if you can kind of give something for the audience, maybe if you wanted to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good actually. Yeah, good.
Yeah, sure. Right. But since you brought up retirement, one thing I'm kind of thinking about right now is the other way that something like, say, Social Security becomes like a scam. Like I mean, we already got the financial aspects of how Social Security is kind of ending up to being like a big scheme, but it's this other idea, this idea of retirement. It's like that's being kind of sold to people and to Americans and such. I mean, this kind of promise, this implied promise that after you worked your amount of hours up until a certain age, then you're done. Enjoy life without having to work. You got your money from the retirement and everything like that. But I wonder if people buy into that a little too much and kind of forget about other things that they may want to do in their life, kind of have that incentive to kind of do stuff for themselves that way, instead of just kind of being idle and just resting for purely to not do anything, I suppose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hope that people have active retirements, in all honesty, and travel if they can afford it. And there can be ways of traveling that are more economical, especially if you do it a bit slower or whatever. But or just pursuing the hobbies. I always say that all those things that people are doing in their spare time after they've done a day's work, when they retire, they should be able to do that as the day, and whatever it happens to be. Hopefully they've got a bit more time and are able to stay active. There's research that shows that particularly being mentally active in retirement improves your mental faculties for long, keeps them, maintains them for longer, and I think even extends lifespan a little bit. So I would encourage people to always be active in retirement.
Yeah, my dad's in like mid-70s, I think, and he's always doing things like playing chess on the computer and winning most of the time, if not all the time. And he's doing Sudoku as well. Like he's always doing that kind of stuff. So, and he's definitely like one of the sharpest people in his own family, I think. Yeah, and he always was.
That's
so
really good.
Yeah, right. Like Sally did been like a sibling or two that was not very good with computers, and they might be getting into like a lot of like spam and stuff like that in their email, and like ruining the computer and stuff like that. But Dad's the guy that fixes it because or that's what he did anyway. And so that's he was one of the more quick to embrace the technological stuff out of the family, because they've been raised on a farm and everything like that. So yeah, I consider myself fortunate to have him as a father.
Mm. No, that's excellent, and it's good that he's maintaining he's maintaining sort of the mental being mentally active and so forth. That's fantastic. As I said, there's really strong evidence now of how beneficial it is.
Mm-hmm. Right, and one thing I want to talk about is kind of the humanization and socialization of the elderly. I think so. So at the time of this recording, I'm kind of slowly releasing an interview I did with Hannah Wallen, and she talks about how that kind of human contact with the elderly really helps them, even if they've kind of ruined their mental state due to lack of socialization. It's reversible. So I hope you guys tune into that one.
Yeah, that's fabulous, and it's great to hear that you're doing things with Hannah. That's fabulous. Who, of course, is well known as one of the honey badgers.
Right, and despite our busy schedule, I think we could persuade him to come on to this show too.
Oh yes, that'd be excellent. Actually, that'd be excellent. In fact, I think we will be having a few guests on in the next few weeks or in future episodes, won't we?
Yeah, sure. So this is consider this an open invitation if you want to come to our show.
Yes, got a few thoughts of some well-known people in men's rights who we might be able to encourage to come on and have a chat to us.
Definitely. So, misandry isn't real. That's the kind of thing that gets thrown out the most from the feminist side. Thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, I think that all you have to do is look at the mainstream media. Actually, it's pretty clear that it's right there. What about demens was a saying that the feminists loved up until a few years ago. I've marked it as having declined about 2017, I think. But what about demens was something they used to love saying.
I don't think I heard that ever.
It was popular probably 2014 to 2017. One of the things I'm doing on Wiki for Men is trying to track these sort of statements and roughly when they're rising and falling and so forth. And the idea there is just that we would be talking about men's issues, and they would belittle the fact that we were even talking about men's issues and trying to dismiss them while being openly critical of men. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's there's really, well, for example, Boris Johnson recently said that if Putin was a woman, this war wouldn't have happened. Now,
they're not listening to us.
So, for those who don't know, it gets circulated in our spheres quite a lot, but not everybody realizes this. There's some research came out 5 or 6 years ago that was based on medieval Europe, and they looked at kings and queens, and they found that queens were not less aggressive than kings. They were in fact more aggressive. Queens who ruled in their own right were in fact more aggressive than kings, more likely to continue wars and more likely of their predecessor, and more likely to start new wars. And there's some research about recent modern leaders as well. So I'm not far from convinced that if Putin was a woman, that this war wouldn't have happened. So I would suggest it's more about personality and personal drives than it does about gender.
Well, considering his reputation, whether it's not earned or it is earned, maybe Putin should consider that. Becoming a woman, maybe maybe he'll ease the load.
His well-reported habit of walking around without a shirt on would probably raise a few eyebrows. So
that's true. Yeah. All right. So what about the idea that sorry, I lost my train of thought here.
That's all right.
Yeah, sure. Did you have any kind of other input to bring to this?
I do. Yeah. I do. So I've brought up a few things on Wiki for Men. We have a lot of information on there, and I was going to throw a quote or three out.
Okay.
See, have a look at some feminist quotes.
Yeah, maybe we can make this a regular feature.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. We've got a lot of quotes, and we actually go to quite a bit of effort to verify quotes. Online these days, of course, there are a lot of sites that list quotes and so forth, and some of them are of questionable veracity. One of the editors at Wiki for Men spent a lot of time going through our quotes and attempting to nail them down as much as possible. And a few got removed as a result of that, or a few got marked as suspect or whatnot.
Sure.
Yeah, so the vast majority of them are pretty solid. But it's been great, the great work that's been put in, and some we've been able to restore, some we weren't sure of, and then we've been able to restore them when we had some better evidence again, and so forth. So now, Maureen Dowd. Maureen Dowd is a columnist working for the New York Times. Dowd was recently quoted as saying, and I quote, "So now that women don't need men to reproduce and refinance, the question is, will we keep you around?" And the answer is, we need you in the way we need ice cream. You'll be more ornamental. So aside from the fact that I question whether ice cream is ornamental, it's a fairly
Yeah.
misandry quote. That is a little odd to answer that ice cream is ornamental. But setting that aside for a moment.
Well, I'd be more than happy to pelt her with ice cream and make it an
What's that,
ornament.
sorry? Be more than happy to what, sorry?
I'd be more than happy to pelt her with ice cream and make it an ornament for her.
Right, fair enough. Yes. Yeah. So here she's claiming that men are unnecessary. Now, you mentioned a word earlier that we sort of didn't expand on much. You mentioned invisible men.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are some men are particularly invisible because they do invisible jobs. And there are all those men who do now there are some women who do these jobs too, but in most of them, the proportion of women is tiny. Mm-hmm. And these jobs are the many jobs that are needed for society to function. And they just, people get up, the men are getting up, doing the job, going about their day. And the vast majority of us completely forget any of this is happening. And we call these the invisible jobs. But if men stop doing these things, society would collapse. Things like maintaining the water and maintaining the electricity and maintaining the roads and maintaining all sorts of other things and driving trucks. Yes, there are some women who do these things. I even thought of things like elevator mechanic. Imagine if all the elevators broke down, right? So society would, in all honesty, of all these jobs, if men couldn't or wouldn't do these jobs, society would just break down. Store shelves would be empty very soon. Food would be going off in fields and storehouses and so forth, and there would be very, very serious problems.
Absolutely.
And so it's this Maureen Dowd's comment here really speaks to a very widely held belief among feminists that that women are independent now, and I'm a strong, independent woman. And I would say that most people, and I count the vast majority of men in this too, are only independent within the constraints of an industrialized society that looks after most of their needs. So I'm only independent insofar as I can go to the supermarket and get my food. Right.
Exactly.
The supermarket stops being able to provide me food. I'm very rapidly in trouble, and you'll pretty quickly see I'm not independent. And the difference is, I admit it, but many of these feminists don't.
Absolutely. Now, I'm looking at the quote because now I have it up on the Wiki for Men page too. So it's fun because here's another aspect to this, is that the assumption is that the will we keep you around? The we is the women, of course. It's always the women, of course. It's not it's as if we're not involved in the decision. Who isn't to say that we can't go the other way instead, like the Jem'Hadar in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is it's all men. And we like last time we talked about the sex robots. Do we really need you women around?
Well, this raises an interesting question. Actually, I was going to go to another quote, but before we go to another quote, I actually want to comment on that, because artificial wombs are coming. They really are coming. Mm-hmm. So there's an ethical problem. From what I understand, they've successfully gestated a number of animals in artificial. I'd probably like it's artificial uteruses. Up to a point, and I think they may have actually had smaller mammals with which they're able to, give birth and so forth effectively. they can't deal with humans yet because of the ethical concerns, right?
I see.
But yeah, but sooner or later there's going to be a situation where there's going to be a fetus that is going to die unless it's transferred into one of these devices, and at that point there'll be an ethical reason to proceed with an artificial uterus.
Yeah,
and they're really selling this on the point of view of women who can't give birth naturally can be able to their egg and the sperm from the husband or boyfriend or whatever can they can have a child of their own, okay, because the woman can't for a variety of reasons give birth naturally.
Okay, now on a bit of a tangent here, this kind of inspires a thought experiment. Actually, it's something I've had for some time regarding the whole abortion debate thing. Like, so it could, I wasn't aware of how far the technology has gone here, but let's just say, as a thought experiment, just a thought experiment, that somebody wants to terminate their pregnancy. Well, if the technology is good, like we're saying, like we might saying here, it can happen, but the fetus doesn't have to die. It could just be transplanted.
That's right.
I
put that to a male feminist recently, actually, and he ghosted me. I said, what if, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be an artificial uterus. Fetal viability is now down to about 20 weeks. I think it's over 50% at 20 weeks or something like that, which is absolutely extraordinary. Now, let's just say that the woman decides to abort at that age. What if the father says, rather than aborting, let's take the fetus out and give it a chance of survival, which is I think what you're getting at there, right? So I put this to a male feminist about 6 months ago, and he ghosted me. So he didn't even want to answer the question.
They want to kill them. They want to kill.
Apparently, that was that's what I was really getting from it. Because really, at that point, if the woman decides to abort, what's the difference between aborting and removing it? It's both still going to be a procedure, right?
Right. Yeah.
So remove it. The mother will surrender any custodial rights and claim to visitation or anything like that. The father will get full rights and bring up the child. What's the difference at that point from the point of view of the mother? And so I think this is something we should be raising a lot more often, that rather than abortion, let's look at like viable fetuses being removed.
I wanted to bring this up but it sounded kind of almost like tinfoil hat or space cadet. It's kind of like, it's not something really people think about. So I was kind of afraid to bring it up. In fact, one person told me that it was just too difficult and infeasible to do that. But
it's not more.
Right. Yeah. And
this is surviving in 20 weeks.
Sure. And imagine this, both sides of that debate being satisfied. The pro-life side will be satisfied. The pro-choice, people will be satisfied, or they should be anyway. Like, if we actually attain this, like, we will be saving up lives here for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you're right. And this I think, especially as viability continues to step further back, this will more and more be something that I think has to be put on the table and talked about. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So we can.
Go ahead. Just wanted to get back to artificial uteruses. So it really raises an interesting question. If we can have viable artificial uteruses and it's legal and it's considered to be ethical because they're well understood, and we know there's people who it turns out a person who is healthy and okay and so forth, and a significant proportion of women start to elect to do this, which I actually suspect won't. I suspect a lot of women will want to continue to give birth naturally, or will want to get pregnant.
Yeah.
But it really starts to raise questions about the role of females in the human species. So you made this point, actually. What about the Jem'Hadar with all male, for example?
Yeah.
If artificial uteruses exist, we could really be looking at transhumanism, where we don't have to have females.
Yeah. It's just a thought experiment. I mean, they get to say that why should we keep you men around? So we're allowed to entertain these thoughts too.
And this is not, unlike the feminists, this is not something I'm advocating. Like you,
right.
Like you, I've simply thought of this, and a lot of other people have thought of this too. That the female role in the human species is to gestate young, okay, in terms of reproductive capacity, reproductive role, as well as supply the ovum. But if that component is removed, it fundamentally changes the nature of the female in our species.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, again, not advocating anything of the sort, but I think these are the types of things our species is going to face over the next few hundred years. We're going to ask these sorts of questions. What are we going to allow? What's acceptable? Are we going to just maybe gestation will evolve? Will become non-biological, and most people will be brought out in artificial uteruses.
Right, but as humans, we've got a choice. It could go one way for some of us. We don't have to in the other way.
Yep, that's right. Yep. But yes, as you say, it's a thought experiment, and it is a good response to the fact that the feminists often talk about men being eliminated or other. There are a number of feminists that have talked about the proportion of the human population being significantly reduced. So proportion of the human population is male being significantly reduced. I was going to read another quote, but before I do, I'm going to read a quote from the Femi-theist. Let's see, the Femi-theist.
Femi-theist. That's is that Crystal Leanne?
Crystal Leanne Milburn. Yep.
Yeah, Milburn.
Exactly. Also known as the Femi-theist. So people who have sort of perhaps been more looking at this in the last few years won't have heard of her, but she a few years ago was quite prolific online and was advocating that men be reduced to less than 10% of the human population. A previous feminist, by the way, Sally Miller Gearhart, also advocated that.
That's the one.
But some of Milburn's statements from a few years ago are really, very openly misandric. It's very clear that they're misandric. But I will make a point that Milburn's gone quiet in the last few years, and it is unclear if she still holds these beliefs. But we're only talking about sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago. This was all going on. But one quote from Milburn. I've picked sort of one of the shorter ones here. Right. So this is sort of as part of an article or as part of a post she was making. She said, we would have a true utopia where peace reigns and men do only what they exist for: breed, labor, serve, die. So how misandric is that? It's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. They get to say it. They get to say this stuff.
Yes.
But right. Somehow society is misogynist or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And here's another one from Milburn on the family. Children should be raised communally and by the state. The nuclear family model is a breeding ground of deceptions, mediocrities, treacheries, hypocrisy, and violence. It needs to be abolished. I'll continue the quote. Bigotry, prejudice, and antiquated convictions are passed down through each generation. The conventional family unit indoctrinates our youth and drains them of their potential. So that's another quote from Milburn. There's actually another feminist, French feminist, recently who wrote a book on the abolition of the family. So this is stuff that's been circulating in feminism for quite a while, but they're becoming more open about it.
Who is this French feminist?
Sorry, I haven't got the French feminist name in front of me, but I did. She's quite recent. This is only in the last year or two this has happened. I'll see if I can dig up her details. Sure. I've probably got her some wiki for men, but yeah, she also advocated that essentially the same thing, that the nuclear family needs to be abolished. And there was another quote I was going to bring in earlier concerning Julie Bindel. She's a British radical feminist journalist, and she actually suggested that men be kept in camps. Now, I've always wondered, they never seem to explain who's going to keep the men in the camps.
Absolutely.
Yes. This one's a bit long, but I think shall I read this one? It's
go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Right. So in response to the question, will heterosexuality survive women's liberation? Bindel stated, it won't, or not unless men get their act together, have their power taken from them and behave themselves. I mean, I would actually put them all in some kind of camp where they can all drive around in quad bikes or bicycles or white vans. I would give them a choice of vehicles to drive around with, give them no porn. They wouldn't be able to fight. We would have wardens, of course. Women who want to see their sons or male loved ones would be able to go and visit. or take them out like a library book and then bring them back. And I am sick of hearing from individual women that their men are all right. Those men have all shored up by the advantages of patriarchy, and they are complacent. They are not stopping other men from being shit. I would love to see a women's liberation that results in women turning away from men and saying, when you come back as human beings, then we will look again. So that's Julie Bindel, a British radical feminist journalist. I mean, speaking of, you mentioned at the beginning, dehumanization. She's talking about men being taken out as like library books. I think that's pretty dehumanizing.
Of course, yeah.
And all these are things we've verified. These are legitimate. These are things these people have said.
But misandry doesn't exist, Robert.
Exactly. So anyway, yeah. So what we're looking at here is, we've got quite a few other quotes there, but we're looking at here a very clear trend of feminists, as you say, they can just say whatever they want. They will. Many of the sayings are really very hateful if you look at them. So I mean, some of the ones I've just mentioned are, but there are plenty of others like that are just as hateful, and some of them are even worse. In fact, did I with Femi Theist? Did I mention about there was a castration quote at some
point? You didn't. I see it. You haven't said it just yet.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't say that one, did I? That's right. Yeah. Shall I cover that one? That's a good one, isn't
it? It's pretty intense. Yeah.
Yes, it is, exactly. So this is something that Crystal Leanne Milburn has said in the last few years in public.
Right.
Right. So she advocated for the introduction of International Castration Day, posting on Reddit. Males of all ages will be brought to the public squares of their cities nude to stand together in a circle as they await castration by a woman known as the castrator. It's very inventive, that. Who will be a woman chosen from the public, much like a juror. Girls of all ages will attend, lining the streets to cheer and applaud the males as they join the rest of civilized society. It will be a free vacation for any working woman, and young girls will be able to leave school to attend this glorious ceremony. The males will then have 1 hour to get to know their castrator. Their female spouse will also be able to choose whether or not they will like to milk the male in order to retain a sperm sample. If the male is too young for a spouse, their mother or closest female relative will decide. After this, the men will be given anesthetics. They will be placed on a table where the castrator will then slice open their ball sack, remove their testicles and the excess skin, stitch them up and clean them up. They will be given 30 minutes to rest after the procedure. Once the males have all been castrated, they will be grouped together again for one last look before walking nude back to their homes. And this is another one by Crystal Lee Milburn, and she was widely reported on, the mainstream media widely reported on this, but there was very little in the way of criticism of what she had said.
I can't help but notice something. Something like this kind of already happens.
True. Yes, that's a really good connection, actually.
Yeah.
Do you want to mention what you're talking about, or explain on what you're talking about?
Well, if this podcast were more interactive, I'd kind of invite the audience to do so, but no, we're not doing this live, so to speak. We're just recording, so I guess I'll have to. Yeah. Well, males, 8 days about, they get strapped, practically nude, at the very least with a diaper on, I guess, unless the procedure is happening. You guys getting where I'm getting with this? And this procedure was basically a sort of castration light back in much older ancient times. It's what you do to enemies, you do to slaves, and I think basically the losers in a war kind of get this treatment as a sort of penalty because they were captured and such. It wasn't fully a castration, but it came close enough, and it's a vital part of the organ that's being cut off. So, and I'm just kind of looking at the analogies here because since they're infants, they would be practically nude, being walked back to their homes, right?
Yeah.
They'll probably bleed for a few days, weeks, whatever, and they freak out online. It's like that Pikachu meme face. They're just like, well, why is this happening to my baby? Yeah. So.
And we actually know in places like Africa too that while a lot of it does happen as infants, there have been documented cases of young boys and even adult men being forced, basically tied down on the roadside, held down on the roadside, and being circumcised right there without anaesthetic. So it is happening to men without anaesthetic and boys. Well, a lot of the babies also happens without anaesthetic, but older children as well. Some parts of Africa. So this is happening around the world, and there is still no country that has made it illegal. Well, Iceland came very close to making it illegal a couple of years ago, but the politicians all backed down in the end,
right,
as usual.
Recently, I got a YouTube comment on one of my videos, in one of them, which I talked about the gender relation, right? He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, I came to this video wondering why are we nitpicking about such a small thing, but then I did a Google search, and it turns out that 2/3 of America's men are circumcised, and 0.2%, which amounts to about 200,000, had him botched. And he said that he was a European, and he didn't know that this is a problem. It only happened. He thought it only happened to the Jewish and the Muslim.
Yeah.
But so it may not happen so much in Europe and stuff like that. But again, I think I'm kind of realizing myself that the issue isn't brought up there even.
Yeah.
It's they think it's just a religious thing, and they don't realize the magnitude of what's going on here.
It's really interesting, isn't it? That's right, that in Europe the proportion is quite small actually. In some countries like Finland, it's absolutely tiny, the proportion of men that are apart from certain religious minorities, it's extremely small proportion of men that are circumcised. And there's some interesting data there on how rare there's actually a medical need to circumcise as well, because these countries that they're doing an extremely, they come to the conclusion that a man has to be circumcised for medical reasons, at a very, very low rate, 1 in a few thousand along those lines. So it shows that very rarely is this necessary. And we've got improved procedures in recent years. There's something called the dorsal slit method that's an alternative to circumcision. It can be used to treat conditions like phimosis, and there's even non-surgical methods now that are available.
We spoke about this in the last podcast. Be sure to catch it, guys.
Right.
We talked about a lot of detail on that one.
I've done a couple of videos recently, and I couldn't remember. Having trouble remembering whether it was our video or another video where I mentioned these topics. Yes, but yes, that's right. I think we did talk about that more. But I don't know if I mentioned it again, actually, that there are alternatives, because
there are.
I'm really quite concerned, actually, that the medical fraternity is being quite, especially in some Western countries, not the US, is really being quite slow to pick up on these changes. I personally know of a case here, somebody who had a circumcision a man who had a circumcision a little bit before I met him. And he and his wife both expressed regret over what had happened, because he was unaware that there were alternatives. Alas, if I had met them a couple of years earlier, I might have been able to talk to them about the alternatives. None of the doctors talked about the alternatives, that there are non-surgical alternatives, that there are less invasive surgeries and so forth. They just went straight to circumcision again.
Well, this kind of inclination to jump straight into it. So in the end, I think this kind of boils down to the downright hatred of the phallus. Since we're talking about misandry here, let's talk about the hatred of one of their defining features here.
As the decades pass and the medical fraternity continues to not move forward with that, well, it makes you start to wonder, doesn't it? Because the information it's out there. These procedures work in places like Europe, where it's more where circumcision is relatively rare. They're doing these procedures, but other countries, they presumably they've still got the capability, but they're just not putting it in front of the patient to let them understand. which of course comes back to, especially in this day and age, research, research, research. If the doctor's telling you something like you need a circumcision, go online, get a variety of opinions, and do the research yourself. Look at studies that are there. There's that information's available, and draw your own conclusion.
Right.
So we've been heading on. We're going on about an hour now, aren't we?
About an hour. Yep.
Yes. I actually have to be up very early. It's late. It's somewhat later. Usually I don't have to be, but unfortunately on this one rare occasion, I actually do have to be up early.
Yeah, what's wrong with you, Robert?
rare, but
yeah,
I got 6 hours. So may I suggest we wrap up.
I think so. Yeah.
On next time, and I think there's so many great quotes that we've got. We can talk about the different things. It really does highlight about the feminist mindset and so forth. We can talk more about gynocentrism too, which is broader than just feminism. Did we talk about Mona Al-Tahawi in the first video? Did I mention her?
I don't recall. Yeah.
No. Okay. Yeah. All right. In that case, let's talk about her because she's great. She's great. She's she's out there just hating on men publicly, and it's calling for violence against men and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's and I can quite happily say these things because we've got the proof, rock solid proof that she said it. We've got the recordings that she said it. We've got the documents where she said it, which we've archived. And she is unrepentant and doesn't deny it at all. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about her next time.
Yeah, let's do that. All right. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening in, watching. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Vernon. Well, I'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, next time. 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.